Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. Paramount Pictures is getting ready to release a film called Arrival. The film is an adaptation from a story written by Ted Chiang called Story of Your Life. And here's the synopsis based on Wikipedia. Quote, when multiple mysterious spacecraft touch down across the globe, an elite team is put together to investigate, including linguist Louise Banks, played by Amy Adams, mathematician Ian Donnelly, played by Jeremy Renner, and U.S. Army Colonel Weber, played by Forrest Whitaker. Mankind teeters on the verge of global war as everyone scrambles for answers, and to find them, Banks, Donnelly, and Weber will take a chance that can threaten their lives and quite possibly humanity. Now, the reviews for this film are off the charts, and if they're any indication of the popularity of this film, then it's going to be one that's viewed by millions of people across the world and chalked up to great science fiction fun. And you're probably going to see some other truth channels take this film and call it Illuminati exposed or alien deception propaganda, etc., etc. And there's certainly that element of it, and not having seen the film or read the book, I can't do a complete hard breakdown, but based on all the propaganda we've already consumed, from the Pepsi commercial with the Black Knight satellite to, Independence Day and Resurgence and all these films that show the aliens arriving, the propaganda is pretty obvious. But let me share with you some other pieces of info that might cause you to think twice about not just seeing the film, but the spirit behind the film. And this is something that is replete throughout the Hollywood entertainment media industry, but there's a clear case of it, a clear example of it here. So I want to show you something that I discovered about this film, and it surrounds the author Ted Chiang. Now, Ted Chiang is not a great known author or well-known author. He's won a few awards or whatever, but when I looked up Ted Chiang, I found something really interesting about his works. Here on Wikipedia, it gives a list of his works, and the first one is called Tower of Babylon, published in 1990. It won a Nebula Award. Then there's a few others: Division by Zero, Understand, and the 1998 Story of Your Life, which is what is being adapted into this film Arrival. Now, he's also written other things: The Evolution of Human Science, 72 Letters, Hell is the Absence of God, Liking What You See, What's Expected of Us, The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, The Life Cycle of Software Objects, Dacey's Patent Automatic Nanny, The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling, and The Great Silence. So he's written quite a bit, and if you notice, there's a few interesting ones in there that are fascinating to look at from this channel's perspective. The first one, obviously, the very first work in 1990, Tower of Babylon. Now, I was able to find this story in PDF form on the internet. And it's a short story, and I'll leave a link in the description section to the PDF so you guys can look at it yourselves. But here's a book review done by John C. Wright, who is also an author, on his website, ScifiWright.com. And obviously this is an opinion piece, but it'll give you, sort of an overview or a synopsis of the stories by Ted Chiang. And you can tell that even he is disturbed by some of the things that Ted Chiang promotes in his writings. So first, here is what he said about the Tower of Babylon, the story that's written by Ted Chiang. Quote, first, the Tower of Babylon tale engages the reader with solid characterization and a thought-provoking description of what the mighty engineering feat of, quote, building a tower to heaven would have been like had the world been flat. It is filled with amusing and authentic touches like the Egyptian stonemasons brought in to chip through the hard surface of the sky dome, or the description of how mid-levels of the tower rendered inhospitable by the too near approach of the fiery sun. But the ending is weak, and the immense tower turns out to have been built in vain. And you got to remember, guys, this was written in 1990. And if you read it, the terminology, Ted Chiang knows his stuff. I mean, he's talking about the plains of Shinar, which is where the Tower of Babel was made. He creates these characters, Hilalum and Elam, Elam being a real character in the Bible, and he's well versed in ancient Near East culture, and that's very clear. And so he creates this story, and it's actually a pretty compelling read throughout, and it follows these characters going up the tower, because you can't go up right away. Apparently you have to, it's like a journey or whatever. And here's a quote from the story. Quote, as they climbed higher up the tower, the sky grew lighter in color until one morning, Hilalum awoke and stood at the edge and yelled from shock. What had before seemed a pale sky now appeared to be a white ceiling stretched far above their heads. They were close enough now to perceive the vault of heaven, to see it as a solid carapace enclosing all the sky. All the miners spoke in hushed tones, staring up like idiots while the tower dwellers laughed at them. As they continued to climb, they were startled at how near they actually were. The blankness of the vault's face had deceived them, making it undetectable until it appeared abruptly, seemingly just above their heads. Now, instead of climbing into the sky, they climbed up to a featureless plain that stretched endlessly in all directions. All of Hilalum's senses were disoriented by the sight of it. Sometimes, when he looked at the vault, he felt as if the world had flipped around somehow, and if he lost his footing, he would fall upward to meet it. When the vault did appear to rest above his head, it had an oppressive weight. The vault was a stratum as heavy as the world, yet utterly without support, and he feared what he never had in the mines, that the ceiling would collapse upon him. Now it goes on, and it's a very descriptive angle to, the possibility of what it would be like to reach the vault of heaven. And obviously, I have come out and said on this channel that I don't think the earth is flat. I could be wrong, and if I am proven wrong, great. And, I know you guys are going to tell me to look at the evidence and all this. Sure, and it's an interesting topic, but think about this for a second, okay? There's a movie called The Arrival coming out that has to do with aliens and disclosure and all this stuff. The Deception, okay? The Deception. If the guy that they got to write a story to continue the propaganda of deception, why is this any different? Why wouldn't portraying flat Earth in a science fiction format be part of the deception? And you might say, oh, but Gons, he's talking about it, which means, in science fiction, they tell us truths through these allegories and these, imaginary characters and settings and all this stuff. Well, sure, but let's keep looking at this story and the rest of Ted Chiang's writings before we make a decision on this. Now, in the story, there's a line that says, when they reach the top of the tower, there's a platform, and they're standing on the platform and they're looking up at the vault. And it says, quote, the priests led a prayer to Yahweh. They gave thanks that they were permitted to see so much and begged forgiveness for their desire to see more, end quote. And then they bring in the Egyptians, and there's dialogue among the workers there and some of the characters talking about Yahweh and talking about how they were allowed to come to this, and is it even in Yahweh's will to actually penetrate this vault? And here's some of the exchange, quote, surely Yahweh will not wash away the tower, argued Kurdusa, one of the bricklayers. If the tower were sacrilege, Yahweh would have destroyed it earlier, yet in the centuries we've been working, we have never seen the slightest sign of Yahweh's displeasure. Yahweh will drain any reservoir before we penetrate it. So saying, Yahweh is for this, he would have destroyed it long before. And then another character comes in and says, quote, if Yahweh looked upon this venture with such favor, there would already be a stairway ready-made for us in the vault, countered Eluti and Elamite. Yahweh will never help or hinder us. If we penetrate a reservoir, we will face the onrush of its waters. He's a little bit more subdued in his approach. He's saying, hey, if Yahweh wanted us to breach into the heavens, he would already have a stairway built for us. Good argument. And it continues on, and it shows their devotion to Yahweh. They're committed to Yahweh's ways, and that's the dialogue there. And there's even a sacrifice. Quote, the priest sacrificed the ox and the goat in the ceremony in which many sacred words were spoken and much incense was burned, and the miners began work. And the miners being the Egyptians that come in trying to push through the vault. And once they created the tunnel, it goes through Hilalum, walking through it, and the waters from above starting to rush down. And there's a section here where Hilalum is trying to get out, of the tunnel, and it says, quote, he slipped several times, sliding down as many as a dozen steps each time. The stone steps scraped against the back, but he felt no pain. All the while he was certain the tunnel would collapse and crush him, or else the entire vault would split open, and the sky would gape beneath his feet, and he would fall down to earth amidst the heavenly rain. Yahweh's punishment had come, a second deluge. Interesting here, second deluge, because God promised, right? Yahweh promised that there would be no second deluge. Genesis 9:11, I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So contradictions in the story to the Word of God, which is okay, it's science fiction, but what's the motive? What's the spirit, the presuppositional worldview behind the author here and the story? Now it goes through Hillelum. He actually breaks through the vault and he's in this other realm and he sees a desert. And, he wonders if it's a world above the world and Yahweh dwells in yet another world that is above it. But as it turns out, the twist in the story, and this is a spoiler, is that Hillelum was back in the deserts of Shinar. In other words, once he penetrated the vault above, he came back to Earth. And he finds a caravan, and the men talk about the tower that was built to the heavens and all this stuff. Let me just read the ending here because it's pretty interesting, and I think there's a couple things to point out. Quote, "Somehow the vault of heaven lay beneath the earth, and was as if they lay against each other, though they were separated by many leagues. How could that be? How could such distant places touch?" Hillelum's head hurt trying to think about it. And then it came to him, a seal cylinder. When rolled up a tablet of soft clay, a carved cylinder left an imprint that formed a picture. Two figures might appear at opposite ends of the tablet, though they stood side by side on the surface of the cylinder. All the world was as such a cylinder. Men imagined heaven and earth as being at the ends of the tablet, with sky and stars stretched between, yet the world was wrapped around in some fantastic ways so that heaven and earth touched. It was clear now why Yahweh had not struck down the tower, had not punished men for wishing to reach beyond the bounds set for them, for the longest journey would merely return them to the place whence they'd come. Centuries of their labor would not reveal to them any more of creation than they already knew. Yet through their endeavor, men would glimpse the unimaginable artistry of Yahweh's work in seeing how ingeniously the world had been constructed. By this construction, Yahweh's work was indicated, and Yahweh's work was concealed. Thus would men know their place. Hillelum rose to his feet, his legs uneasy from awe, and sought out the caravan drivers. He would go back to Babylon. Perhaps he would see Lugatum again. He would send word to those on the tower. He would tell them about the shape of the world. End quote. And that's the way the story ends. Very interesting here. He says basically that, the description of the world is more like a cylinder, and this idea that you go above and you end up below, and the as above, so below concept is interwoven here very clearly. It's very subtle, but if you notice, it talks about how Yahweh didn't punish men, and there was no need to punish men, as if, it is mocking the actual biblical count of Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel. This is slight, yet very obvious that this Yahweh that Ted Chiang creates for this story is not the biblical Yahweh. And so that's the main point I want to bring up, okay? This flat earth, more or less flat earth story is surrounded by a twisting of the character of Yahweh. All right, so think about that as part of the propaganda, as part of the thinking that was behind the writing of the story that is eventually the Arrival movie that's going to be in theaters November 11th. Now let me look at another book here that he wrote, and the other one that was interesting and jumped out at me was obviously the one called Hell is the Absence of God. Again, many awards. It was published in 2001. Let me go back to the John C. Wright article where he summarizes this story. Quote, "The satire, Hell is the Absence of God, reads like it was written by someone who never met a Christian or read anything written by a Christian. In this tale, those who see the light of heaven are grotesquely disfigured. Their eyes and eye sockets are removed and lose free will and become perfect in faith so that they are automatically assured of entrance into paradise. The main character, mourning after the death of his wife, seeks to find a spot where an angel is leaving or entering the world so that he can, if only for a moment, glimpse the light of heaven so that he can lose his eyes and his free will but be assured to meet his wife again in heaven. All goes as planned, but God capriciously sends the man to hell in any case. Hell is not a place of torment, but a bland area much like earth, merely separate from God, peopled by fallen angels whose sin was not rebellion but free thinking. Hence, out of all created beings, only the main character is actually suffering in hell, since he is the only one who longs not to be there, and, thanks to his free will being destroyed, is the only one who loves God wholeheartedly. All efforts of the main character to rejoin his wife are futile. There are secondary characters whose lives are also ruined, and for no particular reason. This story is seriously off track for what a story should be. It is, however, note perfect as a piece of cheap agitprop. I do not mean the tale lacks characterization or craftsmanship. As the story goes, it is taut and well constructed, not a wasted word, but a well-done picture of Saint Peter kissing the hairy black buttocks of Satan would be seen for what it is, a slander against religion, and a fairly childish one, even if the perspective and composition, colors, and figures of the drawing were executed with meticulous craftsmanship. When I say the work is dishonest, I do not mean to imply Mr. Chiang himself as anything but upright. I have no doubt that he writes as his muses move him. I am no sibyl of other authors' intentions by any means, and poets are an elfin and tricky breed at best, and sometimes do not know themselves what the story that comes to life in their hands must mean. But in this case, I humbly suggest that the point of Mr. Chiang's story is not just clear, it is repeated and exaggerated. He is criticizing Christian theodicy. And the criticism can be dishonest no matter how well-meaning the artist who pens it, merely by being false to facts. If a painter draws a wart on a portrait where the original face was smooth and fair, that is not merely an exercise of artistic license, that is a false picture. He's not criticizing religion in general, his ire is confined to Christianity. If Mr. Chiang meant to make a point unrelated to Christianity, then he selected Christian props and tropes to clothe his meaning. Perhaps he means to confine his ire for Protestantism because priesthood is nowhere in evidence. The characters are revivalist lay preachers, not sinister robed figures from Gothic churches. Am I reading too much into it? I think I am not. There is no point to the story if it is not a criticism of Christianity, a topic fascinating to the dominant action of the sci-fi audience, who are skeptics from the West, i.e. from Christendom. Criticism of other religions would be of marginal interest to the expected audience. When is the last time you heard someone blaspheming Thor, right? I will say again, the story is well written. I will say again that Mr. Chiang is a gifted writer touched with divine fire. The sorrow of the widower or the wild rides of the angel chasing truckers make for memorable scenes, but the story itself is a misrepresentation, nay, a defamation. Christians say virtue is its own reward. They also say to love God is good. They also say heaven rewards virtues not rewarded on earth. The martyrs are glorified. They propose the paradox of an omnipotent God who grants man free will. So all Ted Chiang does is propose an omnipotent God who removes a character's free will and martyrs him, cheating him of any glory but without rewarding him either on earth or in heaven. Oh, the irony. The girl born crippled was able to stir men's souls back before she was touched with bliss, because once blissful, the heavenly creature knows no suffering or empathy or suffering. More irony. Virtue is its own reward, so the one virtuous man is stuck in hell forever, and he is the only one to whom it is a torment. Irony upon irony. Yuck, 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 and ain't the God botherers stupid? Well, as a matter of fact, no, they may be wrong or right, but the theology is not simple, and what Chiang proposes is not what the Christians say, or the Mohammedans, or the Jews, or the pagans, or anyone else for that matter. Chiang is trouncing a straw man. That was what offended me when I first read it, by the by. Back then, I was a hardcore Christian-bashing atheist and was therefore on his side, so to speak, but the blatant propaganda of the story nonetheless offended me. I am less offended now that I believe in God. I figured he can take care of his own reputation. My reaction back then was, does he even know any Christians? Does he even know what they say? The story reads like it was written for an audience of utter ignoramuses who have never read a word of Christian theology and never cracked a history book. The major objection honest atheists must level, and I was an honest atheist back then, not merely a character assassin, is that religion is false. That even if true, it has no claims on our loyalty, that the reason of man being reason cannot be bound by dogma, and that the claims, true or false, are repellent to the dignity of free will and rational beings. Now you can read the rest of this article, it's really good, and it's written from an interesting perspective. He wraps it up here, quote, "The church and the prophets before the church have seen more wars and tumults, joys and sorrows, and kept an ongoing, unified living tradition of written accounts and accumulation of wisdom unmatched in the world. In contrast, Mr. Chiang's stories in this volume express nothing surprising to the fashionable modern consensus view. No CIA agent comes on stage without being sinister, no religious figure without a fundy, no Victorian without being narrow and absurd, no big business without being malign. I should call it postmodern. It is too young to be modern. These stories represent a trendy view, not as old as I am. I remember when they became the trend. These are green and flimsy sticks from which to build a house." End quote. So there you have it. This other story called Hell is the Absence of God, which won, again, a bunch of awards, the Hugo Award, Lucas Award, Nebula Award, is staunchly anti-Christian. It is deliberately Antichrist. Okay? So again, think about that when we go back to that story Tower of Babylon when it comes to this movie, Arrival. The guy who wrote the story called Story of Your Life, which the movie Arrival is adapted from, is a staunch anti-Christian. He may be a great science fiction writer, but his views are staunchly anti-Christian, and it's blatantly obvious based on a couple of these previous stories of his. So without getting into the actual film itself, that's the background. That's all the behind the scenes stuff that I think, again, is the spirit of Antichrist, a real spirit of Antichrist that is pushing folks like this who are staunchly Antichrist to higher places in society, in media and entertainment, because they are perfect pawns for the schemes of the devil. And what they think is worldly success, they are actually serving the evil one, the fallen one, Lucifer. So no surprise in terms of the bigger picture, but I think the details here are interesting, considering the fact that this movie is probably going to be very popular, and this guy, Ted Chiang, is probably going to become another one of those great, considered wonderful science fiction writers and be celebrated in that way. So the only thing that we should hold on to is the word of God, and Yeshua is Lord, and he is the one that is actually going to restore everything. And you know what? When we are with him, glorified, we will know the shape of the world. We will know all this stuff, all the wisdoms that come with creation. We will know. So right now, I think the most important thing is to wake people up to the truth, because the gospel message is way more vital than understanding all the nuances of creation. Now, those things are interesting. I think they're good for discussion, they're good for investigation, but they have been used against us for division in this community, in the Christian alternative world, whatever you want to call it, the independent sort of Christians out there in the wilderness, so to speak. And if you look at the lost world, they're the ones that are eating up this propaganda. They're the ones that love the science fiction and the big Hollywood films and all that stuff. And this is where we can actually enter the discussion with them about these bigger questions about life, about reality, about everything that we talk about on this channel. I know these are big, heavy topics and most people don't want to talk about them, but at some point, if you have people you care about, you have to bring these things up. And, a film like Arrival that, again, probably a lot of people will see and there'll be a buzz around it, whether it succeeds or not, I don't know. But regardless, it's one of those topics that really allows you to discuss these bigger issues and at least mention it and use it as a way to share the gospel eventually. So anyway, I hope you get something out of this. Again, the basic idea here for this video was that the author, Ted Chiang, had written at least 2, there probably are more aspects of this since I haven't read all of his entire catalog, Antichrist spirit, Antichrist thinking and worldview, where he even uses Yahweh, the characters, the settings of the Bible to mock it. And we showed clear examples of that. And that's the man who wrote the story, which was adapted into the movie Arrival. So keep that in mind. Pray against the principalities and powers that are behind these types of stories and behind these types of films to disseminate the propaganda into the masses and wake people up with the truth, because the truth will set you free. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.